Hi guys, I thought I'd do a video on exclusively pumping, partly as a reminder of my journey, but also to share with other people, because exclusively pumping, just like breastfeeding, isn't easy, and I think it's nice to share knowledge around so that other people can be successful too with it. Anyway, a bit of a background with my story. I had trouble from day one with my first daughter. I had a vaginal birth, and I breastfed her within the first half hour. Everything like that was going well, skin to skin. I had trouble with her latch. They thought maybe she might have had a tongue tie, but it was never confirmed. So if it was very mild. And now she's 3, and I haven't noticed any tongue tie. So anyway, basically the main trouble with her was her latch, so we went to nipple shields. She wasn't gaining weight even with top-up feeds of pumped milk, and she was an unsettled baby and she was having trouble sleeping, and it didn't end up having to do with my diet. So there was quite a few reasons, and I continued breastfeeding. So I was breastfeeding, then pumping, breastfeeding, pumping throughout a 24-hour cycle, and I did that for about a month to 5 weeks, give or take, and and I just wasn't coping. I was developing postnatal depression, and it got to a point where she wasn't putting on the weight very well either, so we switched to pumping milk only and feeding to her that way. Now the first 24 hours after doing pumping only, she ended up sleeping really well. She'd just wake up for a feed, fall back asleep. But after that, she was back to unsettled. So yeah, her sleeping issues are a whole different story. But anyway, after that, I decided that pumping was much easier than pumping and breastfeeding. And yeah, it was just not worth it. So anyway, on to exclusively pumping. My tips with pumping are, first of all, you need a pump. You need a good pump. If you're going to commit to it, or you have the money, buy a double electric pump. Medela is one of the most well-known and reliable pumps, and high quality pumps too. They're also very expensive, but if you're going to pump, you need a good pump. Otherwise it's a bit pointless, because your milk supply will dwindle. Okay, after getting a pump, you really need to get quite a few spare parts, because you're going to be pumping several times a day. You don't want to have to wash after every single time either, so make sure you got enough spare parts. As for how to pump, make sure you relax. There's quite a few things that people say, but yeah, make sure you're relaxed. Sometimes having a picture or something that smells like your baby around you, or your baby actually near you while you pump. Basically what you do is follow the instructions of the pump, because I had no idea when I first started, but yeah, follow the instructions of the pump, which is basically hook up the tubing, hook the tubing up to the flanges. The flanges are connected to the bottle, and put on your flanges one at a time and hold them on. I suggest also compressing and squeezing on your breasts while you're pumping, because it helps get all the milk out. I have to say I'd pump way less milk if I never squeezed on my breasts. What else is there to talk about? So that's pretty much how to pump. When you turn it on, there's suction levels. So you turn it up to a suction level that isn't, sometimes breastfeeding and pumping is painful, but it shouldn't hurt. That's the main thing. So keep it down low if it's hurting. Just do it to a level where you're going to get enough milk coming out, but you're not wrecking your nipples or causing damage to your nipples. Also, having the right flange size. The flange is the thing that cups your breast. Making sure that your nipple isn't drawn too far into it or not enough into it. Make sure that they come in about 3 different sizes, I think. Check on the internet on recommended guides and pictures on how to make sure you have the right flange, because that also affects your milk production as well. Now, as for pumping schedules, they do recommend it. I guess it really depends on how you've started pumping. You may have started pumping because you have premature babies and you've never put them to the boob. You might want to later on, but your pumping schedules for starting off pumping straight away, as opposed to like me, I was breastfeeding and then went to pumping, are going to be different. So with your pumping schedules, they say every 2 hours, and then no more than, is it 5 hours overnight, I think? Yeah, so I know that that's what's recommended, but I'd have to say I rarely did that. Once my daughter started sleeping through, I'd always pump in the middle of the night once when she woke up, and my husband would feed and I'd pump. And then, yeah, I have to say during the day, probably it was every 4 hours. But I started about a month to 6 weeks in pumping only, so it was a little different, because I'd already built up my supply from pumping and breastfeeding. But my second time around, I ended up not pumping as much either. I was exhausted having a toddler. I have to say that's why I found it a bit more harder. My husband was exhausted too, and he was finding it hard, so I didn't have as close a support second time around either. But yeah, so as for schedules, again, research what's recommended, but you've got to have your sanity in it too. Some people always feed their baby, they pump ahead, so they've always got a bottle of milk ready to go, and they feed their baby that bottle, then they pump straight away. So I guess they're like demand pumping. And again, it depends on you. I found it actually easier to follow a set time schedule in a loose sort of flexible pattern. I would pump the first time that the sun was sort of up for the day when my daughter woke, and then I'd keep it every 4 hours during the day. So like maybe 6:10 to 6. But then again, again, you got to figure out what works for you. It's all trial and error. And what else? Some of the tips I've got are something I learnt afterwards was putting the parts that you use for pumping in a ziploc bag, sealing it, and putting it in the fridge. Some people I've learnt have, use new parts at the start of the day, and they don't wash those parts till the end of the night. So they use those same parts, just putting them back in the fridge to help save on washing. Another tip is having a bucket of warm soapy water if you wash your parts more often, or even not, so that it sits in there and it sort of, it makes cleaning easier when you get to cleaning. Yeah, pumping ahead is another tip. Make sure that you do pump ahead, like that you've got spare milk in the fridge. And also breast milk can be kept out for 4 to 6 hours. So, it depends. Like, some people don't use the fridge at all. They just pump and have their breast milk ready to go for the next feed. Again, whatever works for you. You've just got to play around and figure it out. Yeah, so I think that's about all with the tips I have, and it is hard. Like, it feels like you're doing twice the amount of work, because you're not just breastfeeding, you're not just bottle feeding, you're pumping and then feeding to the baby. So it is challenging, but it's good. It feels good. It feels rewarding giving breast milk to your children. And yeah, I could just ramble on for a while about this. So if you've got any questions or any other tips for other people, feel free to post them in the comments.